Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stood at the podium in a packed congressional hearing room, her voice trembling with fury as she held up a stack of documents. "This is corruption at the highest level of the Justice Department," she declared, her eyes locked on Pam Bondi, the U.S. Attorney General, who sat across the room, her face pale. AOC's words echoed through the chamber, each syllable a hammer strike. "You've abused your power to protect your allies and silence your enemies, but today, Attorney General Bondi, you're done." The room erupted in gasps and murmurs. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment that would dominate headlines for weeks. Pam Bondi, a staunch Trump loyalist and the first woman nominated by a Republican president to serve as Attorney General, gripped the edge of her chair. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She had been blindsided. For months, she had run the Justice Department with an iron hand, issuing directives to review cases against Trump and his allies while cracking down on progressive activists. But now, AOC had evidence, hard, undeniable evidence, that could unravel everything. The documents in AOC's hands came from a whistleblower inside the DOJ, a mid-level staffer named Elena Martinez, who had risked her career to expose the truth. Elena had worked under Bondi for years, but she couldn't stomach what she saw. Orders to bury investigations into Trump's inner circle, directives to target political opponents with baseless lawsuits, and a culture of fear that silenced dissent within the department. Elena had smuggled out emails, memos, and recorded conversations, handing them over to AOC in a clandestine meeting at a DC coffee shop 2 weeks earlier. "I can't live with this anymore," Elena had whispered, her hands shaking as she passed the USB drive to AOC. "But you have to be careful. They'll come for you." AOC had spent every waking moment since that meeting working with a team of investigative journalists to verify the whistleblower's claims. The evidence was damning. One email, sent directly from Bondi's account, instructed a deputy to make the problem go away regarding a money laundering probe into a Trump associate. Another memo outlined a plan to investigate progressive nonprofits for potential ties to domestic terrorism, a clear attempt to intimidate activists who opposed the administration. The recordings were even worse. Bondi's voice, cold and calculated, discussing how to neutralize political enemies through legal harassment. AOC knew this was her chance to hold Bondi accountable, but she also knew the risks. Bondi had the full weight of the Justice Department behind her, and Trump's unwavering support. As AOC laid out the evidence in the hearing, Bondi's mind raced. She had always prided herself on her loyalty to Trump, to the Republican Party, to the law. But now, she felt the ground shifting beneath her. She had followed orders, yes, but she had also made choices. She had ignored red flags, silenced her own doubts, and pushed forward with policies she knew were questionable. And now, here was AOC, a woman half her age, tearing it all apart on live television. Bondi's hands trembled as she reached for a glass of water, her throat dry. She wanted to speak, to defend herself, but the words wouldn't come. All she could think about was Elena, her former mentee, her confidant, the one person in the DOJ she had trusted completely. Elena had betrayed her. The hearing stretched on for hours, with AOC methodically presenting each piece of evidence. She read the emails aloud, her voice steady and commanding. She played the recordings, letting Bondi's own words condemn her. She called on expert witnesses, legal scholars, former DOJ officials, even a retired judge, who all agreed that the evidence pointed to a clear abuse of power. The public gallery buzzed with tension, and social media exploded with reactions. Hashtags like Bondi resign and AOC exposes DOJ trended worldwide. Protesters gathered outside the Capitol, chanting AOC's name and demanding justice. Bondi, meanwhile, scrambled to regain control. During a brief recess, she huddled with her team in a private room, her voice low and urgent. "We need to discredit this," she told her deputy, Mark Reynolds, a loyalist who had been with her since her days as Florida's Attorney General. Find something on the whistleblower. Find something on AOC. We can't let this stand. Mark nodded, already pulling out his phone to make calls. Bondi's team worked quickly, digging into Elena's background for any hint of scandal. They found nothing. No financial improprieties, no criminal record, not even a parking ticket. Elena was clean, but AOC was a bigger target. Within hours, conservative media outlets began circulating rumors about AOC's campaign finances, alleging she had accepted illegal donations. The claims were baseless, but they were enough to muddy the waters and shift the narrative. AOC saw the attacks coming and refused to back down. She held a press conference that evening, standing on the steps of the Capitol with the city skyline behind her. "They're trying to distract you," she told the crowd of reporters, her voice firm. "They want you to look away from the corruption at the heart of the Justice Department, but I won't let them. We won't let them." Her team had already traced the smear campaign back to Bondi's allies, and AOC made sure the public knew it. She released a statement on social media, sharing screenshots of the coordinated attacks and calling them a desperate attempt to silence the truth. Her supporters rallied around her, flooding the internet with messages of solidarity. Back at the DOJ, Bondi felt the walls closing in. She sat alone in her office late that night, the city lights casting long shadows across her desk. She replayed the hearing in her mind, AOC's words echoing like a drumbeat. "You're done." Bondi had spent her career fighting for what she believed in, but now she wasn't sure what that was anymore. She thought about Elena, the young lawyer she had mentored, the one who had looked up to her with admiration. Bondi had seen Elena as a daughter of sorts, someone she could mold in her own image. But Elena had seen through her, had seen the corruption Bondi had tried to ignore. Bondi's eyes welled with tears as she whispered to herself, "I'm sorry." She wasn't sure who she was apologizing to, Elena, the country, or herself. The next morning, Bondi launched a counteroffensive. She held a press conference of her own, flanked by DOJ officials and Republican lawmakers. "The allegations made by Representative Ocasio-Cortez are baseless and politically motivated," she said, her voice steady but her eyes betraying her exhaustion. "The Justice Department has acted within the law at all times, and I stand by my record." She announced an internal investigation into the whistleblower's claims, framing it as a commitment to transparency. But behind the scenes, she instructed her team to double down on discrediting Elena and AOC. She couldn't let this scandal destroy her. AOC, however, had no intention of letting up. She worked tirelessly with her team of journalists, uncovering more evidence to bolster her case. They found additional emails, this time linking Bondi's directives to a network of Trump donors who had benefited from the DOJ's leniency. One donor, a billionaire real estate mogul, had been under investigation for tax evasion until Bondi's team quietly dropped the case. In exchange, the donor had funneled millions into a super PAC supporting Trump's agenda. The journalists also discovered a pattern of intimidation within the DOJ. Employees who questioned Bondi's orders were reassigned, demoted, or pushed out entirely. AOC knew this was bigger than Bondi. It was a systemic problem, a web of corruption that stretched far beyond the Attorney General's office. The turning point came 2 weeks after the hearing, when AOC received a call from Elena. The whistleblower had gone into hiding after leaking the documents, fearing retaliation from Bondi's allies. But now, she had new information. "There's a meeting happening tomorrow," Elena told AOC, her voice urgent. "Bondi and some of Trump's top advisors are planning to escalate their attacks. They're going to fabricate charges against you. Something big, something that could ruin you." AOC listened carefully, her mind racing. She thanked Elena and immediately got to work. AOC and her team devised a plan to catch Bondi in the act. They reached out to a trusted contact at the FBI, an agent who had been sidelined by Bondi's regime but still had access to key intelligence. The agent confirmed Elena's tip and provided AOC with the location of the meeting, a private suite at a luxury hotel in downtown D.C. AOC's team set up surveillance, working with a tech expert to plant discrete cameras and microphones in the room. They knew they were taking a huge risk, but the stakes were too high to back down. The footage they captured was explosive. Bondi sat at a table with 3 of Trump's closest advisors, her expression grim as they discussed their next move. "We need to take her out," one advisor said, referring to AOC. "She's too dangerous." Bondi nodded, her voice cold. "I'll have my team draft the charges. We'll say she's been funneling campaign funds to extremist groups. It'll stick." The advisors agreed, and Bondi leaned back in her chair, her face a mask of determination. But there was a flicker of doubt in her eyes, a moment of hesitation that the camera caught. AOC watched the footage with her team, her heart pounding. This was the smoking gun they needed. She called an emergency press conference the next day, broadcasting the video to the world. The public reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Protests erupted across the country, with thousands taking to the streets to demand Bondi's resignation. Lawmakers from both parties condemned her actions, and even some of Trump's allies began to distance themselves. The pressure was too much. 3 days later, Bondi announced her resignation, her voice breaking as she addressed the nation. "I have always sought to serve this country with integrity," she said, her hands trembling. "But I recognize that my presence has become a distraction. I am stepping down, effective immediately." But Bondi's troubles didn't end with her resignation. The footage AOC had released triggered a firestorm of legal consequences. Within days, the FBI launched a formal investigation into Bondi's actions, focusing on her role in the conspiracy to fabricate charges against AOC. Federal prosecutors reviewed the evidence, emails, memos, recordings, and now the hotel footage, and determined that Bondi had likely violated multiple laws, including obstruction of justice and abuse of power. A grand jury was convened, and after weeks of deliberation, they handed down an indictment. Bondi faced criminal charges, including conspiracy to obstruct justice, misuse of federal resources, and perjury for her false statements during the congressional hearing. The charges carried the potential for years in prison, a stunning fall for a woman who had once been one of the most powerful legal figures in the country. Bondi's legal team scrambled to mount a defense, arguing that she had been following orders from higher up and that the charges were politically motivated. But the evidence was overwhelming. Prosecutors presented the same documents AOC had revealed, along with testimony from Elena and other DOJ staffers who had witnessed Bondi's actions firsthand. The trial became a media spectacle, with every major news outlet covering the proceedings. Bondi sat in the courtroom, her face drawn and her eyes hollow, as the prosecution laid out its case. She had gone from attorney general to defendant in a matter of months, her legacy in tatters. AOC watched the trial unfold from her office, a mix of triumph and exhaustion on her face. She had won, but the victory felt bittersweet. She knew the corruption she had exposed was just the tip of the iceberg. Bondi's indictment was a significant step, but it didn't address the broader system that had enabled her actions. As the trial progressed, Bondi took the stand in her own defense, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's more to this than you know," she told the court, her words echoing the warning she had given in her resignation speech. "The real power isn't in my office, it's higher up." AOC leaned forward, her breath catching. Bondi's testimony hinted at a larger conspiracy, one that reached into the highest levels of government. The fight was far from over, and AOC knew she would have to keep pushing to uncover the full truth.